So we're almost there. Module 5 of 6 of the Fusion 360 certified course. So this evening's session is really quite different to the rest of Fusion. It's all about the sculpt/form environment within Fusion. And where we're coming out of the parasolid modeling environment, going into T-spline modeling, which is a completely different way of modeling, with very specific sort of uses within Fusion, a different way of working. So you can kind of forget everything I've told you so far in the first 4 sessions to an extent, and how you work within this one. But what I will do throughout the evening is show you, hopefully, at least when I tend to use it, and when it's best to use it within Fusion. Obviously, there are lots of other T-spline modeling programs, CAD programs out there, which might be more fully featured than this one, but it's quite useful to have this embedded in Fusion. So if you want to do something which makes use of this modeling function, it's native to the software, and you can go in and out, you can edit it, and it's in the timeline, and you can work within your normal parasolid modeling workspace with T-splines as well as parasolid modeling engine. So it's all about the sculpt/form environment. The reason I'm saying sculpt/form is because it always used to be the sculpt environment. Fusion changed it to the form environment, and I still call it the sculpt environment. I think it's a better, more accurate word, but it's pretty much called form now in Fusion, that form environment, but I still call it the sculpt environment. So what I've got on the screen is just a number of different primitives, just to sort of start talking you through the environment. You can also see the toolbar. It's different. It's all purple, and it says form at the top, so you know you're in the form environment. I'll show you how to get into it in a minute. It's as I say, it's a completely different way of modeling, and generally speaking, you start off with a primitive, some kind of shape which might be close to what you want, and then you modify it. That being said, you can extrude forms, you can revolve forms, you can sweep forms, and you can loft forms. So those 4 classic modeling features, if you like, are available here as well. So if you just have a look at the create menu, and if we have a look down here, we can see we've got at the top, we've got create sketch. You can always create a sketch within any environment to start just sketching if you want to then go into one of the extrude, revolve, sweep, or loft functions. But at the top of the menu, we've got the primitives, and these are a set of shapes which are just starting points, which you can choose. You can design a box, a cylinder, a square, a plane, a torus, a quad ball, and a pipe, and use this, as I say, just as a starting point from which you modify. And that's often the way I found it works quite nicely for the sculpt environment. It's quite quick to just choose a shape and start manipulating it. So that's the create menu. We'll go through those different primitives in a bit more detail in a minute, but the really important menu, which is a really long menu within the sculpt environment, is the modify menu. With the sculpt/form environment, you can kind of push, pull, twist, skew, enlarge, decrease, scale, all very more organically than you can within the normal workspace modeling. We can do a whole array of things in terms of modifying our primitive. We can fill holes, we can add creases, we can weld things, we can bevel things, we can pull, push, flatten, straighten. There's a whole heap of stuff that we can do to sort of mold your primitive. And I'm just going to show you some of the most useful ones this evening to get you up and running if you haven't used this environment before. Has anyone ever used this environment in any of their models? You have. What did you use it for? Sure. Yeah. So you're just using some of the sort of the primitives and using those as tools to cut into things and subtract it. Very quick way of making a sphere, isn't it? Did you manipulate any of these forms? Okay, cool. Well, that's useful to know. Has anyone else used it at all? That's fine. Most people haven't sort of used it very much because it is completely different. But there are really there are times when it is really useful, I have to say, when there's something which is, well, it's a complex shape often. And it's often that you might be doing something which might be quite concept model, quite early design stage, and you want to just experiment and perhaps push and pull a shape around because you're really not sure, or you're trying to model something which is much more organic in the first place. And it might be quite difficult to do that using the more standard modeling features that we've looked at. So there are other times when it's just useful for certain little things, and that's what I tend to use it for. Because I use most of the standard modeling environment in terms of solid modeling, the surface modeling, but every now and then I come across a shape that I want to create, which is a bit tricky, and actually it doesn't have to be super accurate, or I'm not trying to make it anything, that's got to fit with anything. It's just got to look right. And sometimes this is a really quick and simple way of doing it. And I'll show you some examples throughout the evening of where I've used it. It's going to be different for everyone, depending on what kind of things you make. So that's what we're going to be having a look at this evening. And in terms of the evening, obviously we're going to have 2 halves, but this evening might be slightly shorter in terms of showing you this, because it's all about the sculpt environment tonight. So if there are any questions more broadly about everything we've looked at throughout the course you want to ask later on, just put it in your mind. If there's anything you want me to go over again, or any aspects you haven't seen that you'd like to, that we fit in, maybe the half an hour we might have left, we might have a bit of time at the end of the evening. We'll see how it goes. Right, so let's work through some of the primitives we've got on this particular example here. So if we have a look at this one first here, obviously sphere primitive. Oh yes. Well, let's just make a new design. That would be helpful, wouldn't it, really? So if you come to a new design, we can see in the toolbar the only purple icon is the one in the create menu, and it looks like an exploding purple box. Create form. Okay. So if we click on that, we enter the create form environment. That's as simple as that. And you can do that at any point. It doesn't have to be at the beginning of the design. You can be halfway through a design and design whenever you want. Oops, not that one. Here we go. You can start right from the outset, and you can just create something as a form, as a very first thing. That doesn't have to be. Or you can have modeled something up and you think, I need a shape, and I'm not sure how to do it using the other techniques. You can start a sculpt at that point if not to. So there's no, you don't have to do it at any particular point in your design. You can start at any point, really. I'll show you some examples. Constraint, yes. That's one of the limitations. You've got to think of this as more like a virtual piece of plasticine. You can't really measure a piece of plastic. As you push it and prod it and pull it, one bit will move as you push it, and then another bit will sort of bulge out. It's a bit like that. So if you want to do something really accurate, this isn't the thing. You can get it accurate to a degree, and you can put constraints to some degree, but I have found it not to be the most accurate modeling environment if you want to get things down to a tenth of a millimeter, for instance. That's when you really want to go back to using the traditional modeling techniques. Measure it. You can indeed, yes, but I mean, if you want to sort of define it by dimensions and constraints within sketches, you can't do any of that because it's a virtual blob of plasticine. That's how it starts out.
If you want to do something like that.
Yeah. Or if there's an element which isn't that important, what the dimensions are exactly, and that can happen, quite a lot in my experience of modelling. A lot of it has to be really accurate, but occasionally something needs to be more perhaps ergonomic, and it doesn't need to be.
I was just going to say, otherwise I try and think the usage of saying, so for instance, well, that's the one you're going to make it in, or like a full one in the end. So it would give me a form to start with, and then I could just manipulate it slightly, which is a lot quicker than say building it ground up using techniques that we used last week.
Absolutely. Yeah, it might be that you just don't need that level of accuracy on everything that you do.
Make a ball, put the gears on the top, and then it's kind of done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it really depends how accurate you want to be. Here's some examples of different types of primitives. I've just done a load of them basically. We've got things like a sphere. Here's a box. You can see it's very rounded, it's a blobby shape. You can put angles into form objects and creases, but they will start off as kind of smooth, blobby lumps of plasticine, essentially. We've got just planes, or a surface, a flat surface, which was then just gently deformed. So you can work with surfaces as well. These are, in fact, all surface models until you come out of the sculpt environment, sorry, form environment, then they will turn into a solid object. So you are always working in surface mode, if you like, but when you click the finish form button, when you finish the form, it will turn into a solid body if it can. And if it can't, it will tell you there's an error. So again, we're always trying to work towards a solid body and then a final component. We can see, here's a pentagon. You can see the blue line, that's the sketch I drew for that pentagon. And then that one was extruded. So you can just extrude things as well. This one over here, let's zoom in on it a bit so we can see. This kind of doorknob type thing. This one has got another sketch. Does that look familiar, that kind of sketch and how that object was made? It's a revolve. So you can revolve things in the sculpt environment as a starting point, then modify them and manipulate them if you want.
So familiar because it's the thing from your 3D maths.
Oh, it does look a bit like that, doesn't it? I don't think it was meant to be, it was just a revolved object. Because I've probably got the shadows turned off. There's lots of different display functions for Fusion in this little menu down here. And environment effects it'll be under, ground shadow I haven't got switched on. I tend not to have that kind of stuff switched on, but you can have it. It just tends to slow things down sometimes and how things are displayed, but you can turn all sorts of stuff on and off, should you wish. Other ones, we've got torus here, so like that donut shape, that's one of the primitives, actually quite a useful one occasionally. This one here, this one's a cylinder, although it's been manipulated slightly. That's a cylinder primitive. And here's another box, this time with a creased corner. So these are sort of like the kind of the starting points that you might choose to begin with. You will also notice around some of them, we've got the green lines. And well, let's show you what that does. Let's just modify one of them. Let's just pick this up. And let's just go. So, modifying stuff. I'll just show you all about modifying stuff in a minute. But you can see what's happened here. I picked up one corner and just sort of pulled it up. You can see it's happened on all the other corners, hopefully. Any idea what those green lines mean? Symmetry. So you can add all types of symmetry to the forms you've created at an early stage if it is symmetrical. If you've modified it already and it's no longer symmetrical, you may not be able to so easily. You can have different planes of symmetry, you can have radial symmetry, if that makes any sense, as well. So we can have a look at that. But it's very useful because a lot of objects we design often have at least one axis of symmetry or one plane of symmetry, and it's good to put that in at an early stage. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But really, once you've created a primitive, it's the modifying bit that's the really important thing. So I think what we can all have a go at doing is just creating a primitive, and then I'll talk you through how to modify it. So if we open up a new document, to create a primitive, I'm just going to create a box, the very first one. So I'm going to click on box, the mouse will work. And now to create the box, what you have to do, you have to draw a rectangle to start off with. And it's a center point rectangle. But the first thing you have to do is tell it which plane you want to draw your rectangle on. So I'm going to click on the top bottom plane. And then we've got a little cursor, and I'm going to put my center point of my rectangle on the origin. You don't have to, but I'm going to. Here I can put in dimensions. It's very much like it's just a very straightforward, center rectangle. I'm not going to put in dimensions here. I'm just going to click once. And this is still in preview stage. So we've got this kind of preview of this primitive box, very curvy box. But if we have a look at the dialog box here, it tells us all sorts of things about it. First and foremost, it tells us the length and the height and the width. So we can change those now if we want to. We can just pop into any of these fields and edit this and change it to whatever you want. So let's make it 100 millimeters by minus 65 by whatever, something regular. So we can change dimensions at this point. So we're still in preview mode, as I say. The most important thing, well, one of the things that we can do, we can subdivide it. So you can see it's already subdivided to some degree. It's got two length faces. So this face and this face. Two width faces. This face and this face, and two height faces. That's just the default. We can add more faces to our box if we want to. So say I might want to add, maybe make it 4 length faces. And now it's subdivided along its length into 4 faces. And you can set this up, you can add more faces later on if you want to, but it's a good idea just at the early stage just to perhaps put in the kind of faces you think you might want. And I'll come on to how you determine that later on. But let's have something like that, maybe with 4 length faces, 2 width faces, and 2 height faces. And then a bit like an extrusion, you can change the direction, so you can have either one side or symmetric. So you remember that center rectangle we've created, you either create the box from one side or create it from both sides of that, driving rectangle, which will keep your origin point in the middle, if that matters to you. So I'm going to keep mine on one side for now. The last thing that we can do in this dialog box is, if we want to at this stage, we can add symmetry. At the moment, we have no symmetry defined. If I start modifying one side of it, that's all it'll impact on. We can always add symmetry later, but if we want to add symmetry now, we just drop down on the drop-down menu and click on Mirror. And then we've got little tick boxes. We can have length, width, and height symmetry. So we've got 3 planes. We can have 3 symmetries should we wish. In this case, depending on how you've drawn yours, it'll either be length or width, but I'm going to have symmetry along the longest axis, if you like. The width in this case, more logically, it feels like it should be the length, but it's the width symmetry. So now we've got one plane of symmetry. Let's leave it at that for now. That makes sense?
New body operation, new height symmetry.
Does
You've
it?
got the option to make a new body. It's the only thing it offers you, new body.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes or no. Well, right, it doesn't even offer
Why hasn't mine got that?
No.
That's not fair.
We've got this shortcut.
I wonder if there's been a recent update that, I mean, mine usually updates automatically. Maybe. Yeah, no, I'm surprised, because the only thing it can be is a new body at this stage. It can't be a component. You can't make a component at this stage within a form environment. You can't really do anything else but from it, so it seems a slightly pointless thing for it to be in there.
It's a drop-down menu, there's nothing else in that menu, and there's nothing you can't turn it on or off.
Let me just have a look at your little, if you go on to that one there, click on job switches, click on this one. I just wondered if there's anything about the new.
I've got a new version as well.
It might be that that is just a little thing they changed in the recent updates. It might be on an older version. It might be, because I think mine updated literally a couple of days ago. It does it very regularly. Usually on the morning when I'm about to teach something, it changes. But it doesn't really matter from this perspective. I don't think it's anything major. So what we've got a box that looks something like this. We've got a number of faces, hopefully about 4. It doesn't really matter for this example. But I'm just showing you these are the kind of things you can change at this early stage of designing your primitive. Once you're happy with your box, you just click OK.
Now you've finished it. Is there a way to go back to that?
No.
No, you started.
Yeah. So one of the limitations of the form environment is down here we'll have no timeline for anything that we do. Okay, or it's the way the T-spline modeling works. So when you start modifying things, you start filling in and pushing them in all different ways. You can do that so many times. You would end up with so many different modifiers down here. So that is one of the differences, I would say, between in this normal solid modeling environment. When you take this back into your work, your normal design, as it were, this will exist within the timeline, and everything else will be there. And you can go back and edit things, you can go back to this form and change it, and then bring it back in. But whilst we're in here, we don't have a timeline. So we've got some kind of primitive, so now we need to start modifying it. The very first thing on the top of the modify menu is the edit form modifier. And this is the thing you'll use time and time again. It's the thing to, if you want to use the form environment to start practicing with. It's also this big button here, which is easier to navigate to as well, above the modify menu. So you click on that. This looks quite complicated. I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but I'll just show you the basics of how it works. If I hover over any of the faces, the lines, or the points, you can modify any of those or multiples of those. So I'm just going to select, so I'm going to hover over this little, well, actually, let's hover over a face. I'm going to hover over this one and click once. And let's have a look before I start modifying it to see what's happening. We've got our modifier triad popping up, and I'll explain in detail what this does. The face that we've highlighted is turned blue. The face opposite it is turned yellow. The reason it's turned yellow is any ideas why that might be? Symmetry. Exactly. So whatever we do to this blue face will be replicated on the yellow face because we set up that line of symmetry. Well, if you haven't got symmetry set, I'll just come out of that, Stephen, and show you. If you ever want to go in and change symmetry, if you haven't got it set, we've got the symmetry menu, and we click on mirror internal, and we can select two faces, and the line between those two faces is where the symmetry will be. So if I select this one and this one, I've now got symmetry running that way. So if you haven't, or you didn't in symmetry, you can go back and do it, or you can add it retrospectively. You can also remove symmetry as well. So sometimes when you're modeling stuff, you can be symmetrical for a while, you get a lot of it done symmetrically, and there might be something you want to do, change it asymmetrically. So you can turn symmetry on and off, which is really handy.
It's pretty much subdivision modeling that you find in other programs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's very much like that. And this will have been, basically, you know what Fusion does, it buys up little companies with programs and chucks them into Fusion. That's what it's called, Fusion. It hoovers up these little functions and shoves them in. So going back to the modify tool, I'm just going to talk through this modifier triad a little bit. There's lots of stuff going on inside here, but we can basically use all of these white sort of icons to move and modify in different ways. The arrows will just pull that particular face in that direction. But as you notice, obviously, this is a piece of plasticine, a virtual piece of plasticine. It will pull the rest of those faces so they're always connected. So, you know, whilst you are modifying that face, anything that's connected to that face will also be modified as well. So you can pull in any direction this face quite simply. Okay there.
My fingers crashing when you go into modify.
Oh.
Just throwing it out of Fusion and stuff like I do it on here.
Yeah. It will come up with a message saying you are still signed in. Sign into this one. Do you want to suspend your account on that one? You just say OK to that, and it should be
I
OK.
always forget to open one home because it's just that every time I come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got these arrows which move this face in any direction, in any of those three directions. But if we look at the square in between the arrows, that will move. If we use that square, let's just demonstrate. If I pick up on this one and move that around, that's basically moving planar, moving in this direction and this direction at the same time. So it's moving planar. So that's quite a handy one to know. You can obviously do that for any combination of planes. So this arrow and this arrow, that one's the planar modifier for that. This arrow and this arrow, that's the modifier for that one. If that makes sense, it's a planar modifier. So if I want to move in this direction and this direction at the same time, just because it's simpler, I'll pick up on that one and I can move it around planar like so. We've also got these rotational handles around the edge, these curved arcs, so we can turn that face. Obviously, as I say, modify the other faces connected to it. So if I pick up, let's just zoom in a bit. If I pick up on, say, this one, I can rotate that face in whichever plane I choose. That's pretty straightforward, hopefully. And then the other things, these little lines around the edge. Well, this one, this one, this one, all of them, and this dot in the middle. These are scale modifiers. So we can scale this this plane, this face using one of these. This one is scaling in both of them at the same time. This one and this one. Same for any plane you want to work, and you can scale by plane. Or if we just hover over the middle dot and I move this in and out, it'll scale in all three planes at once, essentially scaling that face uniformly, if you like. So it's quite complicated, that modifier, but it does a lot. And with the form environment, it's really just about playing and practicing and having a go, really. And there's no real rights or wrongs. It's quite a free environment just to have quite a lot of fun with until you want to start doing something serious with it. But it's quite good to just play with that modifier and get used to it. So we're in the modifier menu, and say I've modified this face. If I just click somewhere outside of the body, I still stay in that modify menu, so I can then click on something else. So I want to then move on to, say, this line here. I can then click on that. So you don't have to reselect modify every time once you've done a modifying operation. You can just stay within that modifying environment. And as I say, you can pick up on any face, any line, or any point and modify any of those. So I can pick up on, say, this point here and just pull that one up. Do whatever you like, really, into any face, plane, or line. And it's really understanding over time which is the best thing to select to get the shape you want. And that's the kind of the bit that just comes with practicing and playing with it, because I'll show you my approach to doing this in a minute or throughout the course of the evening, but it's not necessarily the right approach, it's just my approach when it comes to something like this. You can also select multiple faces, multiple lines, chains of lines, and multiple points. It doesn't just have to be one thing at a time. So say I want to modify the back half or the back quadrant of this, I can select, by holding Shift down, I can select as many faces, lines, and points that I want. So say, for instance, well, let's include this one here. I want to work on that part of this and modify the whole thing. Just holding Shift down and selecting them all will help me do that. And then the modifier triad is kind of in the middle of those 5 faces that I've selected. And then you can just play around and modify it however you see fit.
Never seems to do what I'm expecting it to do.
That's the thing. That's the thing. That's why it's more than anything else in Fusion. You have to just spend time and play to an extent and just experiment with it. And it's quite hard to teach exactly what it does because it doesn't always make sense to me either. But if you do think of it as like a very fluid piece of plasticine, that's probably the best analogy I can think of anyway. You can also select whole chains of lines as well, which is a really handy function. So say I wanted to modify this particular chain. If I double click on that line, if I hover over it and then double click on it, that's just a useful thing to know, quick way of selecting a whole chain. and let's say I might want just to scale that up for whatever reason. There's lots of different ways you can modify your form. It can be a bit overwhelming when you first start where to begin with it. But hopefully some of the exercises we'll do this evening will show you, how you might start to actually make something you want to design with it rather than just being a fun, thing to play around with. So, just to mention, I'm not going to go into too much detail about all these different icons up here, but there are different ways of setting up your transform tool, your transform mode, and your coordinate space, and your selection filter. I think it's probably not worth me showing you all that now because I don't want to overload you, but at some point you can have a look at that. I have to say, for my uses in it, I stay in default mode nearly 95% of the time because it doesn't. Yeah, the exam will only touch very lightly on the sculpting form environment. And I don't know all exam questions, but the ones that I remember being in mine were literally make a primitive with X, X length, X, set dimensions and number of faces and give it symmetry. And it was as simple as that. I'm going into a bit more depth in this evening because that's worth knowing. So forget about the exam in a minute. It's not massively in the exam, but it's worth knowing all of the functions for modeling. But yeah, they don't go into detail. Well, they didn't anyway.
Yeah, I didn't have any when I did the mock.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any for sculpts.
Yeah. Those mocks are only 2 mocks and there are 40 exams, so there might be, but it will be light. It is certainly part of the syllabus each. So once you've finished editing, you just click OK, and it's just still selected, and then we've got a form, okay? We've got something, and we might be happy with it. What do we do to bring it back into the normal modeling environment? We have to finish the form. We have to basically tell Fusion it's no longer using the T-spline engine. We've got to go into the Power Solid engine, and we've got a big tick up here called finish form. Let's tick on it. You may get an error at this point. If you've made an impossible shape with overlapping surfaces, which it can't compute to an actual shape which could be made, it will throw up an error, and it'll probably be quite a technical error saying, blah, 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 this can't be actually resolved. We'll try and do that and see what it looks like. But you can see now we're back in the solid modeling environment. We've got our form down in the timeline, and now we can start just using it as a solid body. We can chop into it, we can subtract from it, we can add to it, we can project text onto it, do what we want to it as a normal solid body. It was a surface when we were in the the form environment. It is now just a standard body, solid body within Fusion in your normal design workspace. Let's just go back. So if we want to go back and edit our form at any point, it's just like any other feature in Fusion. We go back to the timeline, and right click on Form 1 and edit. And we're back into the form environment. So we can come in and out and we can change it to our heart's content. I'm going to try and just break it a bit and see if I can do something which won't compute.
You need to try and break it.
You can see I've basically dragged one face to the underside of the object. You'd never be able to make that in reality. But what happens if I try and finish this form? T-spline surface self-intersects. Well, actually, that's one of the more understandable warning messages you get in Fusion in my experience. T-spline model failed to converge. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, it doesn't work. So, and it's nearly always because you've got some kind of self-intersecting surface. And you need to go back and see where that is. Now, helpfully, although it does put this rather annoying dialog box right at the top of it. Oh, I can move it. The problem is highlighting it in red, which can be really useful if it's a really tiny overlap that you've got and you don't think you've got one. It'll at least try and show you where the problem is. You can go back and resolve it and try and make it a non-overlapping form.
Yeah, if you just hit continue there.
If I hit continue there and we've gone back into that environment, we can see nothing.
Right.
Because it couldn't turn it into an object. We've got, this is now yellow, And a yellow or a red icon in the timeline basically means there's a problem. If we want to know what the problem is, we can right-click on that icon and review the warning. T-spline surface self-intersects. So we can then go back and edit it and hopefully resolve it.
So that's going to let you cut it off, basically, where I put the red line. You could use that to slice it.
You can't, you have to go back into the edit form and then you can't really cut it. Well, you could cut it, I suppose, but then you'd have a surface, which is fine. So what you could, let's try that, shall we? Let's see if we can make that work. Let's bring it through here again. So what you can do, you can just pick up a face and delete it as well. This will still fail because we've still got, an interlocking and an intersecting surface. Let's delete some more. Oh, and now we've deleted, and we've got, we can delete any faces we want at any point, and we've got something that looks like a vessel now. Now this is a surface model, as I said. We're always working in surface in the edit form environment. If I finish this now, what do you think will happen? Any ideas? No thickness. So what might it look like in the normal timeline once we go back into the normal work environment? Surface. Exactly. So we're not going to be a solid body. Let's see what happens. Finish form. We've now got, if you remember that orange always means it's a surface, it's not a solid body. So if it can convert it into either a solid body or a surface, it will. It will only not convert it, it's intersecting itself. So you can create surface bodies, you can make solid bodies with this sculpting. So it's quite powerful. And the kind of things you can do. So, shall we have a go at making an actual thing rather than just a blobby box? Because it's easy to make blobby stuff. So one of the examples I sent over to you yesterday was a spade. And I was going through trying to find a good example of a sculpting environment, which was quite quick. And I was trying to do something much more interesting than a spade, I have to say. I was trying surfboards, skateboards, all kinds of things. But they're all a little bit awkward, and the spade worked really nicely. So I've gone with the spade. So I'm sorry about the slightly dull nature of the object and rather simple nature, but it's quite a good example of how we can actually make an actual thing, or close to an actual thing anyway, the starting point for an actual thing. So if you look at this object here, so before we look at the sculpt environment, let's think about how we might otherwise model this. Any ideas how we might go about modeling this if we weren't going to use the sculpt environment? It is a bit like a spoon. Yeah. Yeah, so you could have a series of profiles running all through here and guide rails. Quite complex to do because certainly doable, but we've got a thin end, and this end it might be getting thicker as it gets towards the handle, might gradually increase in size, and then obviously changing its shape quite dramatically as it gets towards the handle point, as it were. That might be quite tricky to get all those profiles the right kind of size so it smoothly blends from one thing to another. That's where Sculpt's actually quite good. It will always try and smoothly blend that shape, and you can manipulate shape quite easily to get quite a smooth, complex shape quite quickly. So, I mean, it's always about trying to do things quickly and efficiently using any of these pieces of software. So this is quite a good use case, really, for something like this. So this was started off as a primitive, and this primitive was then changed into this shape. Any ideas which primitive I might have used to start this off with? Why do you think of rectangle?
Because you made it like that and you finished it.
Could. I mean, you could probably start with just about any primitive. I didn't, in this case, start with a rectangle. Any ideas? Kind of primitive, any other ideas? Why do you think a cylinder?
I would start at the hand with like the top face naturally, because that's you need that to be exact.
Yes.
And then
Exactly. That's exactly what my sort of thinking was as well. The likelihood is whatever is going on here is going to be a round piece of wood.
The only dimension you know, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the only thing which is affixed. So a cylinder, to my mind, was an obvious place to start and then change everything from that. But as I say, you could probably do it with all sorts of different primitives. It's not the only way. So I'm just going to have a go at designing this. I'll just show you how I approach doing it. I can't really talk about it because it's the sculpting environment. It's one to show, I think, really, rather than talk about. So I'm going to create a new design, and I'm going to go into the create form environment, and I'm going to create a cylinder. The cylinder I'm going to create on the front back plane, and I'm going to, let's give this a dimension of, say, 40. So we've got a preview here, diameter of 40, height of 40, obviously. Diameter faces. Now I noticed this being a bit glitchy, I have to say, because that is incorrect. We haven't got 3 height faces. It's 4 by 4, and I can't know why this is doing this, but that is. I'm going to put on now. I noticed earlier on just being a little bit glitchy. There's something new in Fusion I'm not aware of. But what we should have with the default is that perfect circle, which is what we want, or that how we want to keep that circle really. And I'm just going to keep it as those standard dims for now, with heights and diameter faces.
The 3 is done by the edge, not done by the number of faces. So you've got 3 edges that's mirrored.
Okay. Interesting, isn't it?
If you did none on the mirror, these would have 3 all the way around.
Doesn't seem to be entirely logical to me, that. Anyway, that's what, yeah. Doesn't seem, maybe it's because it's a cylinder, but it looks to me like that's a 4 by 8. Yeah. That's what I would think of it as, a 4 by 8, not a 3 by 1. So that's something that, yeah, it's a cylinder. If you start changing diameter faces, maybe it won't be. Let's. Yeah, if you put 3, that's what I think of as a 3 diameter faces. That was. So it seems to be slightly. A bit weird. I noticed this earlier on when I was running through it, and I don't remember seeing it before. This being an issue.
What's the other problem?
Faces is a bit like that.
Yeah.
Circular either.
I'll just go with the default like that. It should be circular. Let's just go with the default like that for now, because it does seem to be a slight oddity in that.
You set the cube to the front. Circular.
Sorry?
If you use the view cube to go to the front.
It looks circular to me.
Looks a bit off.
If you start changing diameter faces,
I didn't
no?
change it. I mean, what I have now, but
Yeah.
it came in circular.
I love it when Fusion does stuff like this, because
I'm going to try it again.
generally it doesn't, but yeah. It should come in as a cylinder. A cylinder is a circular object, obviously. It's circular extrusion. I mean, another way of doing this would be, if you wanted to, if you were having that problem, you could just draw a circle and extrude it. Let's not get bogged down into that too much for this example, this slight oddity. Let's just grab this cylinder as a default, and all I'm doing is just stretching it out a bit to make it a bit longer. I'm going to keep it as that default, okay? We'll perhaps look into that in more detail later. How do we start manipulating this into a spade? And it's quite, I think it's quite obvious, hopefully. We've got to flatten out this cylinder to make that spade shape for the shovel shape, and then basically pull it to make it wider and longer. So if I go to the modify tool, and I'm going to select, hold shift down, I'm going to just select I'm going to select these 4 faces. And all I'm going to do is just start dragging them down. And you can start thinking, well, that's not quite right, is it? So you can always Control Z when something like this. If you've done something you don't like it, you can just Control Z. And you can Control Z almost infinitely, I think. So I'm going to select these 2. Let's try selecting these 2 and putting this down. Now we're getting something which looks beginning to get to a shape that might make sense, but it's still a bit awkward. So I'm going to then select perhaps these middle lines. At the moment we've got a shape which is doing this. I want this nice sort of smooth curve shape. So if I select these 2 lines here and pull those down to something that's a relatively smooth curve. We can't be obviously particularly accurate with this environment, but we can get something that looks like a smooth curve. So we're beginning to get that sort of top shovel shape. Now we need to bring the bottom of that shape up closer to it. So I'm going to select, this time I'm going to select the faces and the lines all in one and see what happens. And I'm going to bring this up to start trying to meet it. Just got the cylinder. I started off with these 4. And it is very much a, experiment often to work out what's going to work. Start off with those and just drag it down. And you can see what's happening. We've got this shape, something like this. Not quite a curve yet, is it? So how do we make it more of a curve? Well, what's the bit that's sticking up? It's where it meets at the top there. So let's select this line and drag this down to make more of a curved shape. Yeah, but it takes a while to take the shape. It can take a very long time to manipulate it into the shape you want. And off at the bottom, I'm going to select the 2 faces and the center line as well for those 2. So here, selecting this face, this line, and this line. I'm just going to bring it up using the straight up arrow, just to bring it up. So it looks something like that. But, oh, what's going on here? You've got to be careful because I've overlapped the shape. We've got something that looks like that. It's beginning to look a bit like a spade. I'm going to bring this up a bit more just by using those 2. So all I'm trying to do is bring those top surfaces down and those bottom surfaces up into a curve. How's that going for everyone? Yeah, exactly. So if it does that in the middle, you will need to select these 2 lines and bring those down to make that curve. It's a totally different way of working in Fusion.
Rather than using the middle one, use the top arrow. There we go. And bring it up one. A little bit higher than just that. You're going to want it to be exactly on top of each other?
No, you want to have thickness between it. Because it could overlap easily without realising it.
Well, sometimes when you go with the arrow, jump.
Yes, so that's one of the issues with those arrows. It does do it quite big increments sometimes. You can also sometimes put in a value, but you can also work using the planar tool as well, and that does it much more smoothly as well. Yeah, zooming in will.
Zoomed out, you can does the
Yeah. It would be nice to say to hold a button down in Fusion and just get rid of those. Have that.
Almost everything else, you all shift and refines.
Yeah. That's letters to Fusion, isn't it?
I think with this, you're probably best person just disable the snapping.
Yeah, I don't know if that will. It seems to be a sort of a fundamental thing throughout Fusion. Whatever you do, that seems to be the way it works. So we've got maybe something that looks like this. If you remember, our diameter is still only around about 40 millimeters. So it's a very, very small spade at the moment. So we need to make this spade head much bigger. So to do that, I'm going to select this time. I'm going to select all of these and the underside ones. The bit of the spade I want to actually make into a bigger thing. And I'm going to just have a go. Let's see what happens if I scale the whole thing up by using the middle dot of the modifier triad. Oops, went the wrong way there. That's, oops. Ah, yes, we don't have symmetry. Oh, there we go.
You don't have to have symmetry, right?
No. Yeah, it just might be useful, mightn't it? So if I move this in and out, you can see, well, that's working, but it's making an odd shape if I go too far handle. So what I might do at the same time is just pull this forward a bit and then do a bit more scaling. So you can do multiple things at any one time. It's getting there, but I'm still not happy with that. So we have to go through and just work our way and kind of do what we think works. And if it doesn't work, Control Z and go back to a point where you think it might work again. So I'm now going to pick up the edges of the spade, these two here, and just maybe I'll pull this out wider.
I've already done with an edge, but is it possible to extrude an edge? So you can select to the end of it and then extrude another face from that?
Yes, it can. I'll come on to that in a minute.
Right.
I'm also going to perhaps make this bit, which is really stubby, longer as well to draw out that handle. So I'm going to double click on that end circle, select the whole thing, and then I'm just going to pull that out a bit further. Still, something like that. And then I think I might select all of these again, because at the moment it's not sort of swan necking down in a nice way. So I'm just going to grab that and just pull this, and then put it in planar. It's got a much nicer, smoother shape, and it's beginning to look a bit more like that one looks more like a rowing blade, isn't it, or something like that. But you can hopefully see how it begins to start to move into a spade shape. But with sculpt environment, there's lots of fiddling around, basically, trying to get it really do what you think it should do, or to modify it into the shape that you want.
You have more sections.
Absolutely.
So around my handle part,
Yep.
and when I pull it out, obviously it's just going to extenuate the curve, but I might just want to make the cylinder part longer but equal.
So, say we've got our handle, and we want to basically make this a bit longer, or whatever. We want to add faces, we don't just want to extend the faces that we've got. The reason to add faces is to give more detail. The only time to add more faces is if you can't get the shape that you want because it doesn't subdivide down enough into small enough bits. So the way to do that is, whilst we're in the modify environment, if I say I want to extend this cylinder backwards, make that handle section longer, I'm going to double click on it to select the whole thing. Now, if I hold down the Alt button, as I drag it out, you can see it automatically makes another set of faces. That's a really nice, quick thing. You can do that in on any edge, to any open edge, to create new faces quickly. Hold down the Alt button, pull out another, and it will pull it out as an extrusion, if you like, in this sense. So we've got a nice cylinder at the back there, which is kind of what we kind of want ultimately, isn't it? And so we're getting to a point where we might have something that looks a bit spade-like, but we can keep on modifying it really to, as much as we want. And we might want to make you select that open face first. Let's do it again. So if I double click on this whole line, select the whole thing. Now I hold down the Alt button, and then you drag out in the direction backwards, as it were.
Yeah.
It will automatically create another set of faces.
Oh, and one more.
One more set. So add another set. So it was subdivided into 4, then it will be subdivided into 5 and 6 and so on, however many times you
Yeah.
Good. Good. I will often just use what I find is quite a useful.
Edit form that you hold Alt.
Yeah.
And then drag them out.
I often just pick up dots as well. Just points is another nice way of just manipulating a shape more accurately.
Yeah.
What do you need to do to press the rules?
So, say I want to extend this end here. I'm going to double click on the whole thing to select that whole ring. Hold down the Alt button and then drag out in the direction you want to move in. But you've got to have the Alt button held down.
Cool as well, though. But to be fair, that looks more like a show maybe than what's on the screen. We normally do screen and stuff. You get a image and then you got screen.
Yeah.
Yours are more accurate.
I'm sorry, but it's round. But it won't do it.
Okay, I just realised I've got like a ghost outline of my original cylinder.
So what will happen if you come out of your your form environment, gone into the normal workspace, then come back into it?
Yeah.
It'll show you a shadow of what you've done previously.
Okay.
It's there to try and help you. It kind of gets in the way, and I haven't had a way of turning it off, I have to say. But it's just a history showing you what you've previously done. It won't be, recorded in the end. So really, and there's another exercise we'll do later on. There's really lots of time spent within that modifying tool, understanding how it works, creating shapes, getting it horribly wrong, and slowly learning how to use that modifier tool to do what you want it to do. And it is really just practice and getting all sorts of bonkers shapes until you get something that you do want.
Yeah, mine did. I did something that didn't make perfect circles, so I dragged it out.
Right.
So things happen. You have to investigate why, I can tell. But that works out okay. I've got a split in mine, which would mean that put your hand on.
I'm not too sure how you did it.
I did it by accident.
So that might be an issue when you come to finish the form, whether or not it will actually do that, because things like splits and like that, you probably want to do as part of the normal modelling exercise outside.
Right.
So that might not edit and finish. If you try clicking on finish form, see what happens. Oh, it's done it.
Don't seem to like it.
Okay, fair enough. But as I say, if you were going to do a split, you'd probably want to do a split with a rounded edge, so there's no stress factors coming off the end of it, things like that. But you can do things like that. I find the sculpt environment you can kind of go on almost infinitely, really, modifying things and getting it just how you want. But once you have got a shape like this, and you are happy with your shape, we've then got to do things to make it into a solid shape. Because what happens now if I click the finish form? If I click on the finished form and I look in the bodies folder, I haven't got a solid object. I've got a surface object. So it's not a solid thing that could be made yet. So we have to then basically turn it into a solid object. How do you think we might do that? Any ideas? Remember, what have we got? We've got a surface body there. Anyone remember the surface modeling from last week? Or are you still scratching your head over modifying things? Fair enough, just model away and just, we'll come on to it in a bit. I'll have a Jaffa cake.
Mine's stuck, so as I drag the mouse, it's just continuously dragging it around. I can't stick it with.
Your mouse is stuck.
Yeah, like it's similar to almost like it's in the tape wheel or something.
don't know what the reason for that. It does have like sticky on the orbit. Very is it frail bit?
Try and recreate that. I haven't had that before.
Oh, hang on a minute. Something on Magus that you see as like a target in the spring.
Yeah.
Well, you should be able to get a target. You should be able to just escape and get out. Yeah, it's still doing it.
Try finishing the form and just see if it's still hot.
Yeah.
How strange.
Well, it's done.
I don't know. You want to save it and perhaps reopen it? I don't know. I've never had that one before. I have to say, I'm not aware of what would cause that. So, to close this shape up, if you remember, this is a surface model. So we're going to have to go into the surface tools to close that up and stitch it together to turn it into a solid object. Does that sound familiar? So let's go into the surface modeling mode. And I've now lost my cursor. Do you remember I showed you the patch tool? Patch tool is a really useful tool for just, closing surfaces. It's under the create menu. Patch, it's also the very first one on the toolbar here under the create menu. And if I hover over any open shape, it will pick up that boundary and patch it. So the end of the spade is open. So if I'm going to click on that and click OK, hopefully you can see now we've got another grey surface in there. So there's been a patch. So we've got the create menu. So this one here in surface, yeah. Create, and it's the very first one in the create menu. But I'm also going to patch the end handle as well. So I'm going to patch again and hover over that circle and click OK. Now we can see in our bodies browser folder, we've got 3 bodies. They're not connected, it's still bodies. Do you remember what we have to do to those? The surfaces which aren't connected. Not combine, we've got to sew them together, we've got to stitch them. It doesn't do it automatically, unfortunately. So if you remember in the surface modeling, we've got modify, stitch, it's also this first icon up here. We click on that, and we click on the surfaces we want to stitch together, which is all of them in this case. I might have to zoom in a bit to get to this little one down here.
I can't see the patches.
So are you in the surface modeling toolbar? Yes. So it's the very first one here, create, or it's under patch is this one here.
Ah, right. Okay.
It's also this button right at the beginning.
I couldn't see it on the menu. I was blind to it. Right.
So once you've stitched it and selected those 3 surfaces and clicked OK, it should turn into a body, but it hasn't for whatever reason. Or maybe I didn't. It's weird. Whatever reason, mine's not showing us as a proper stitch. Wonderful. An issue with that. We should have something that looks like that.
Blue's good. The body's full.
Oh, the nice thin, yeah. Yeah, it takes a bit of sort of playing around, really, in some ways. Turn some of these off. Sure. So if you ever want to go back and change it, you can always go back and edit it and have another go. So on yours,
kind of filled it in.
Yeah. But yours should turn into a body rather than having it as the
Yeah, that's
surface.
interesting. People know, isn't it?
Yes, because when I tried to mess around with that, like, editing that
I don't know if that's been bad. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an unusual shape.
It's a good shot.
Well, you know, I mean, it's just a case of having another go for it. Really.
Yeah, and patched is, but it's still got the 3 buttons.
So have you stitched them together?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. He's done the stitch, and then it's not in with any.
There's no stitch down in the icon down there. So if you go up to, oh, you come out of that sketch, you don't need to sketch. So if you go up and click on stitch, and then select the 3 bodies, you can do it from the browser as well. Let's try stitching it. Click OK there. There we go. Our body.
So that was on.
So you've got to remember, if you've got surfaces which aren't connected, aren't stitched, it'd be nice if Fusion did it automatically, but it doesn't. You have to remember to stitch them together, and if they stitch successfully, they'll make a solid body. If they don't stitch successfully, there's something wrong, basically, with those surfaces. You're going to go back and see where there's a gap or see where there's a problem.
It's more.
You're kind of might be more familiar with.
It's what I'm more used to.
Yeah. It's
just a bad habit. I take that from other things and start using it. It's kind of more fun. It's the point of it. I might as well just do the other stuff.
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, other software will do this better than Fusion, I think.
Yeah.
But the reason to do it in Fusion is because it's then native within the timeline, and you can use it in other parts of your design. You can bring in a T-spline from something else,
Yeah.
but you may not be able to model with it or modify it in the same way.
I'm going to be honest, it seems to do it better than most of the programs I've used.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
The
interesting.
other programs focus on topology too much.
Right.
So Versus tries that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, we don't really care about that.
Mm.
It's just does it for you.
Yeah.
It's, the new Halo game, Halo Infinite, they use Fusion to build all the armor.
Oh, really?
The Spartans in there.
Okay, right.
So it's faster to get more organic shapes out there.
Oh, that's interesting,
So
isn't
they
it?
just set up a new department to
Work on the
sculpt
Fusion.
it. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's like games are starting to incorporate actual.
I guess if it's a good solution for them,
Yeah.
it's surprising, really, in some ways. Yeah. Which example are we on? This one. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully we've all got to something that looks like that-ish. That's because I'm practiced. That's all there is to it. You know, so it's the first time you've used this environment, you'll get weird blobby-looking shapes which aren't what you want, and it just takes time, and it's just something to practice in. You'll see there's a lot of timeline grayed out here. I can show you. I'm not going to go through this now because this isn't about the sculpt environment, but it's just to show you how you can then take it on and use it, you know, solid modeling with a sculpt shape or a form shape. And I'll just talk you through the process of turning this into a complete piece. So obviously I've got another shape here which I've split down and then thickened to make just a hollowed section, and then I've just joined those together. And what we should have in here is just one body with now that hollowed out shape which the handle would go into.
Could you show us that? Yeah, that's what I'm drawing.
So I've got, go back a bit, go back to, yes, so we're here, and what have I done here? I did a split at this point. That's an important thing, so I split it before I've done anything else, because I knew that part of it was going to be solid, and part of it needs to be hollow, obviously, to get that end of the handle in, obviously. So at this point, I think, well, this bit is going to be solid, this bit is going to be hollow, this is the time to split it. And then I can do the patching, so then I'm turning off this one, patch that one at the end and stitched it to create that solid lump. If I turn that body back on, this one here, that's that surface body, I've then, in the surface tools, I've just thickened it, give it a wall thickness using the thicken tool. You remember that in surface modeling? Just to thicken that and then combine the two to make it one object. So you can split anything down at any point. You can't split within the form environment, but you can split anything as soon as you bring it out from there. You just start working with it in a normal way.
Is there a specific reason you went for that workflow? Because it's like the way I would do it is I would do another sketch for a circle and then extrude that in. So that gives the same effect.
The only reason to do that here, you could do that perfectly well. The only reason here that this wasn't, if you see this cylinder, it's actually tapering.
Yeah.
So if I want that smooth shape, if it's just a straight cylinder, yes, and you just want that, smooth shape into a cylinder, that'd be fine. But if you want that nice, smooth, flowing shape, you want to follow that, then that's the reason I did it like that, to get that more flowing shape. It might be easier to manufacture the way you were doing it, but actually, in terms of components. Although any shape could be cast, can't it? So there's no reason not to. You just have to have the end of the handle turned down to fit this. Well, generally, if you look at it, yeah, and I didn't really look at spade manufacturing or construction when I modelled this up. It was very much an example, I have to say, but I should imagine they're held in by a couple of pins or something like that. So I don't know. Did they? I wouldn't have thought wooden handle ones. Having put threads into wood, it's not something you want to do on a regular basis. It's a pain, but I have done it. You can buy wood threading things. Yeah, but you could do. Okay. So the red line showing there's a problem. A green line is basically those two surfaces will stitch together. If there's a red line, it's basically it's open. There's nothing to stitch to. So perhaps your two elements aren't stitching correctly. So let's go back and have a look at this one, for instance. If I try and stitch this now, if I select the surfaces I want to stitch, I've selected one surface, and it's red because I haven't selected any other surfaces. So if I select this surface here, it'll turn green because those two surfaces, it's basically giving a preview saying, yes, those two will stitch together. If it's red, it's showing it's either there's a problem or it's not stitching to anything.
I created a body. This is at the end of the spade.
Yeah.
Well, not a body, I created a surface.
Yeah.
You put patch and using the outline around it, like stitch the two together.
Okay, and is there like a visible gap between the two, or does it look like it should work? Okay. I'd have to come a closer look. Perhaps in our break, I'll have a closer look at exactly what's happened there. Generally speaking, if you've created your features, your surfaces by patching, you're creating them from existing geometry, so it should be correct, unless there's an overlap, a tiny overlap, or a slight inconsistency in the body you're patching from. And it could be quite minute with surface modelling. Let's get solid modelling. Sorry.
Do something by myself.
So, all right. So all I've done from that point on, is just to obviously just extrude a handle. Pretty straightforward, or in this case, revolve the handle. And then the rest of it, I'm not going to go through in detail, but if you want to have a look at the rest of the way that handle is modelled, please do feel free in your own time to have a look at how that handle was modelled. It's just a series of either sweeps, extrudes, fillets, all solid body modelling, pretty straightforward, or understandable, hopefully. But I won't go through it now because we're going to try and focus on staying in the sculpt environment. On this one, yes, you could. There's a number of ways you could do it. I think the way I approached it was to revolve the handle. The reason I revolved the handle because I followed this shape internally for the inside. So if I turn off, sorry, that's the wrong one turned off. So that's the shape I was trying to achieve. That's why it was a revolve rather than extrude. Always best to revolve a cylindrical object. Thing there, and then the actual the sort of triangular element, I think I did as a sweep in this case. If I have a look at that, so I created a sweep, And I think I might have even tapered that sweep slightly, if I remember rightly. It tapers down. That was a tapered sweep, mirrored across. You could do something and just chop it out and extrude it. And then your handle end was just a straightforward extruded block, just joined quite crudely to that shape and things split it off and neaten it up a bit.
So you want to do a custom molded brick, essentially, the surface model again, not surface rates.
Yes, that's an ideal environment to do things like that. Yeah. Those sort of ergonomic handles. That's a really good use for it, where you don't want to get those kind of nice, interesting divots and shapes, but you're not worried too much about exact dimensions. You just want it to look and feel about right. Absolutely, that's a good use case. So a sweep. Think of a sweep as an extrusion, but it's following a curvy line. An extrusion just follows a straight line perpendicular from your profile sketch, and straight out. A sweep is following that profile and going along a line. A loft is projecting one shape here to another shape and sort of transforming along from one shape to the other. Does that make sense? If you're ever not sure, just hover over any of these things and it gives you a really useful little dialog box and a diagram. So the sweep sweeps a sketch profile or a plane of face along a selected path, and it shows you exactly what it does. Here's your profile here, a bit like an extrude, but instead of going straight, it's running along the path. And with the loft, it's here, going from one profile to a different profile, but you can also put the laser. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sure. Well, different people pick up knowledge different ways, don't they? Absolutely.
They look like that.
Maths.
Yeah.
Well, the words are too mathematical.
So that's a very, very sort of, first glance at the sculpting environment. We'll take a 10, 15-minute break, but after the break, we've got another example of sculpting, so we're going to have another go at sculpting madness, perhaps a slightly even more complex shape. But I'll also show you how to bring in reference canvases, because sculpting is a really good thing. If you've got a series of drawings and you want to turn a 2D set of drawings into a 3D object, sculpting can be quite good for that as well. So we'll have a look at that after the break. Okay, so part 2 of module 5, sculpt environment. What I thought I would do, so we had a look at the spades example. I thought I'd just show you another example that I've modelled up, and we've used this over a couple of years now. It's quite a slightly more in-depth example of how you might actually go from concept to actually, a design within Fusion which would be manufacturable, perhaps more from a craft perspective. So a lot of what we looked at is much more sort of engineering based on making a thing which might move or have a function. This is perhaps from another perspective where we're looking much more sculpturally, perhaps looking at a ceramic object. So a couple of years ago, I was looking around at home looking for a good example of what I could try and sculpt up. And this little raku pinch pot came to mind. It's been knocking around my home for years. It was done on a raku taster course. But it's obviously, an object that's made with hands. It was made just out of let's think how it was made. It was made out of a cylinder of clay with a base and then pinched together. So I thought, actually, perhaps I can try and recreate this using the same sort of thinking within the sculpt environment, because it is a very moldable type of material, obviously, clay, and we can mold it in the same way in the sculpt environment. The reason for doing something like this in Fusion, rather than going straight to clay, is you might want to work within Fusion to develop your concept models beyond perhaps sketching. You may not want to go straight into clay. You may want to make tools. You may want to make some kinds of molds. So it is valid to model this up in Fusion, although you may be used to working with just hands or something like this. This was my thinking anyway. So you can see on the left-hand side a picture of the pinch pot, and you can see my resultant sculpted model. of pinch pot, which is reasonably accurate. But if you have a look at the timeline, you can see there's hardly anything there. We've got a picture, which is just for reference, which is, I'll come on to in a bit. A couple of pictures. We've got the sculpt itself and a fillet. And that's it. So everything apart from that final fillet was done, in this instance, in the sculpt environment. So you can work solely in the sculpt environment, if you wish. So how do we begin with something like this? And how do we begin if we've got sketches in a sketchbook? We've ideated something just by, as a lot of us will do, is just start drawing something in 2D. Here's an idea, and we'll generally start in 2D, just looking at it from one side. And, oh, it's going to look like this from this side. And that's often where, not all of us, a lot of us might begin in conceiving something. Not always, but maybe quite a common thing that we might do. What we can do in Fusion is bring in reference canvases. So say you've got those sketches, you can scan them or take a photograph of them and bring them into Fusion and start using them as a starting point. So you're not just starting with a blank workspace, which can be a really useful thing to do. Let's have a look at the example here. So I'm just going to turn on. So very much a hand-drawn sketch, okay? Side-on view of my pinch pot. You can upload JPEGs either directly from your computer, or you can upload them into your data panel. I just go back to the correct folder. I'll show you. Uploaded. So I've got my PNGs. I think PNGs or JPEGs in my head. I've got my side view. I've got a front view, and I've got a top view. So as I was developing this design, I did some sketches, and I was taught to design things in orthographic projection, but that's probably my age more than anything else. But that's what I've got, and this is probably the bare minimum of what you might need. I mean, you could just start with a side view and sort of work everything else out in your head, but it's useful to have more than one reference sketch. Ideal to have 3 or more, perhaps. But 3 is probably a good number to think about. Orthographic projection is when you're looking at something from the side view, the top view, bottom view. So if you think of like a standard technical drawing, you'll have a front view, and then you'll have the side view and the top view all in relation to each other. That's all orthographic projection is. Yeah, you can upload them from your computer into your data panel. Is one way of doing it, or you can insert directly, insert canvas, okay, into, and you can insert from your computer, or you can go from wherever else you've stored them in the data panel, and you can bring them in. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And you can bring them in and start using them as a reference. It's a really handy thing. So let's have a go at doing that. So to do that, I'm going to insert canvas, and well, they happen to be on the right place here, but if not, you just navigate to where they are. Select the one you want, and it's asking where do you want to put it. You have to select a plane. So it's a side view, so I'm going to put it on the left-right plane, this one here. I'm going to select that, and you can see if I zoom in a bit, it's come in like so. I'm going to put it right slap bang in the middle and just click OK. I'm not going to worry about scale at the moment because I don't know. I've scanned this in. It could be all sorts of sizes. I'm not going to think about scale right now. It doesn't really matter at this minute. But you can scale it here. So we've got our side view in. Now, but I've also got my top view and my front view. So I'm going to put in a couple more reference canvases. So I'm going to go back and put another one in. And let's go with top view. And I'm going to put this on the top bottom plane. So a computer's stupid, it doesn't realize that this has got it the wrong way round. So, but it gives us an option of turning it round, so it is in the right way round. Happily, this is scaled up pretty much exactly. Doesn't always happen. You can see that line's pretty much in line with that one. And these are pretty much in line with that, so we need to come in about the right size. Remember, these are just for reference, but we want them to be about the right in relationship to each other. And then I might put that final front back view in if you like. So final one is canvas and front. And this time I'm going to use the front back plane. So this one's coming too big. So now we need to scale that down. So it's about right. So if we look at the dialog box over here, we've got we can scale in X and Y separately. But that's going to skew it if we do one or the other, or we can scale in them both at the same time. So I'm just going to reduce this scale, and I'm going to guess this is going to be about 0.7. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that doesn't make much sense. It always says scale plane X, Y, regardless of which actually is. Yeah, that's not very helpful. I know it would make more sense depending on which one you fit it on that it got it right, but it doesn't change that. All you're basically saying is you're scaling in both directions at one. It's an inaccuracy which is well spotted, definitely. But no, it's not. I mean, all you're trying to do is scale it down evenly. You don't want to scale down in one dimension and not the other because it's going to change your drawing, obviously. So I've scaled that down so it's, I'm thinking, about right. Oh, that's probably too, not quite right. So let's go for right there, isn't it? As I said, these are just starting points. Okay, so we've got something which is about correct. Now we can start using this rather than just trying to imagine it all in our heads. We've got something to refer to. So as a sculpt form, let's go back to these pinch plots. This one here. Think about the primitives, where we're going to begin. Any idea which primitive you might want to use for something like this? Remember, we've got spheres, boxes, toruses, cylinders. Any ideas? What's it? Sorry, a box? Why a box? I mean, you could do it out of anything, but
The canvases are all box shaped.
the canvases themselves are in a box.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. No, see, the extents are a box, aren't they? But the actual shape itself. Yeah, it might be. Yeah, you could do that. You could do. That was my approach, but it's, as I said before, with the sculpting environment, you can do it any way you want. I worked with a cylinder because I knew I wanted to make this a surface because this has got a relatively even wall thickness, which I can then thicken afterwards. That was my thinking, basically. So
when you first made this for real, was the initial bit done on the wheel?
No, it was all done by hand. Yeah, no, nothing was done on the wheel. So yeah, it was a lump of clay, a blob, which I then pushed and manipulated. But I actually, if I think about it, looking back, I made it into kind of a cylinder with a bottom, then pinched it, make that shape. So it's similar, perhaps, in the way we're going to model it, the way you could model it. So I'm going to go to create form, create cylinder, and I'm going to put it on the top bottom plane. Oops, wrong plane. Let's do that again. And I'm going to drag it out to, if we look at the sort of looking out from the top on, from the top downwards. I'm going to drag it out. I'm not worried about dimensions at the moment. I'm just going to scale it up later. Something like that. Oops, pardon, back. And it's defaulted to symmetric. So you could do it one side from that circular sketch you just created. In this instance, it makes more sense to do it symmetrically because it needs to sort of cover the height of the object. I might make it just a little bit smaller. Doesn't have to be exact at this point. Diameter faces, I'm going to give, let's think, 12. Height faces, I don't know why it's saying 1 again. It should say 4. That seems a glitch to me, but I'm just going to leave that as it is. Symmetry. kind of got symmetry. I mean, obviously it was made by hand, but for the sake of modeling at this stage, I'm going to give it symmetry to make my life easier. If I want to make it asymmetric later on, I can do so. But if we think about that pot, where's the symmetry line? Right, on that, on the front back, sorry, the right left plane, this side. So, now it's already highlighted it for me. There we go. So we've got that symmetry running along that plane. It looks quite complicated at the moment with all those reference canvases in place. But that's the primitive we're going to start with. So how do we go from this to start manipulating it using the modifier tool? The way I approach it is to sort of break it down into manageable bits. Not necessarily the right way, just my approach. So I'm going to go and look at it just side on. And I'm going to pull that form so it adheres to kind of a side view. Then I'm going to turn it, look at it from the top view, and manipulate it so it looks kind of right from the top view. Then I'm going to look from the front view and kind of manipulate it again. Those first three stages, then probably a lot more time manipulating it to get how you want, but break it down into sort of manageable sections. The way I do it is by using those reference canvases in turn. So we're looking at the side view, so we can only see one of the reference canvases because the others are kind of hidden. And if I start to modify it, the way I might approach modifying something like this is to just pick up points. And using the planer tool on this plane here is just drag it where I want and just start working my way around to start to sort of bring that. And you'll have to go back to points sometimes because once you move one thing, it moves something else. And just dragging it around to there. The bottom here, I'm going to double click on the whole line and just bring it up slightly because that's where my sketch kind of is. Nothing's trying to be too accurate here. I do want to keep the bottom of my jug flat for obvious reasons. It will sit on the table much better if it's flat. So in my mind, I'm always thinking I don't want to do anything which is going to impact on that bottom surface and make it wobbly. So if I'm going to change this point here, what I'm not going to do is that. I'm going to just move this using this arrow. So that bottom surface will always stay flat. So anything on that bottom surface, I'm just going to remind myself I want to keep that flat at this stage and not make my life harder by changing it. So, and then we can just work our way around. Yeah, and then you'll have to go backwards and forwards sometimes, get it how you want. Come too far out, so we go back in a bit. But you can see relatively quickly, you can start to get the outside shape in relationship to your reference. Into the top, I might try and do this just to start off with and bring that down. And a bit more. Points and lines at this stage for me. But you can hopefully see relatively quickly, you've got something which is, we've got a side view that looks similar to the reference. That's what we're trying to do at this stage. So now I'm going to go around and have a look at it. Well, nowhere near what I want yet, but it kind of looks rightish from the side. So I'm now going to look from the top view down. And actually, that's not too bad as an overall shape. In some ways, it's not too far off. But if we look at the actual sketch, this line here is the top of the jug, and this line here actually is kind of the outside side to the jug, isn't it? So I'm not going to do too much with that now. I'm just perhaps going to change that so it fits that. And I'll say I'm okay with that for now. I'm just trying to get the general shape. And then I'll go to the front view. And here we've got to do a bit more, obviously. And here I might just select a face and just start pulling it out and editing the shape to get it how I want. One thing I would say when you start working with sculpt environments is always keep an eye on these lines. You tend to get the nice sort of good shapes if these lines are relatively smooth and flowing, they're not doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So it's just one thing to bear in mind, really. You can always kind of inspect those lines and just try and keep them flowing smoothly. If you want that smooth flowing shape, that's what you want after all. So we've looked at the side view, we've looked down from the top, and we've looked from the front, and it's a starting point, and that's all the reference canvases can give us, is a starting point. Because if you think about those three projections on a shape like this, it's quite limited information, but it's better than nothing. So now if we have a look at that shape, whilst it's by no means the finished item, it's a lot closer than the cylinder was that we began with, and we know it's something like what we're trying to achieve. And what I might do now is just keep those reference canvases on, but then I might start thinking about changing it to more how I want. So looking at the bottom, I might want to bring the bottom in a little bit. So I'm going to, go to the modify menu and just perhaps shrink this slightly. Bring that in a bit, and then I could think about this shape at the bottom. Am I happy with the shape? Is this a shape which I feel is, what I want, really? And these are the kind of questions you kind of ask yourself as you're sculpting. It's very much what looks right, what looks good. We're not trying to constrain it to any dimension. We're not trying to get it to do a thing. We're just trying to get it to look how we want.
If we wanted it to be a circle, we couldn't ask it to be one.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there may be ways of doing it and snapping it to a constraint. I haven't found them. It's much more for modeling more freely, but there may be ways of doing it. I have to say, I'm not, a complete expert in the sculpt environment, I have to say.
Could you draw a circle in a sketch, maybe, and then reach faces to it?
Yeah, you could do something like that, absolutely, yes. No, because we're not in sketch world here. So I mean, you could certainly draw a sketch. I think you're exactly right there. You could draw a sketch. You could extrude something, and as you say, bridge to it and join shapes like that. And you will be able to keep that an original circle. But what changes from that circle into that shape will change. But as you can see, I'm just working on the top part of the lip, if you like. I'm just trying to make it closer to what's happening here to that, so you can see it's kind of closing up a bit. There may be at times when it just doesn't have enough faces to give you the detail that you want. And if you look at the back here, this is awkward. This isn't giving me enough detail. I can't change this face enough to get the kind of shape that I want. So if we want to give more detail, we have to subdivide the faces further. If you remember with the spade, we added more faces by holding down the Alt button and dragging out more faces. But if we want to subdivide an existing face, it's a really useful thing that we can do is we can insert an edge. We go to the modify menu, we can insert an edge. And if I click on any edge of any of these faces, it's giving a little preview. We can insert an edge somewhere along here, and it will subdivide this face into two faces, and it just gives us more modifying points. It gives us more ability to add detail. With the little slider, I can move that along to wherever I want that edge to be. And now I've got extra just manipulating tools that I couldn't do before. Okay, so that's a really useful tool for just adding detail where you need to. I would only add edges where you need them, where you just can't get that detail because you want as few surfaces as possible. It's a bit like drawing with splines. You want as few spline points as possible. But if you just can't get the detail, you have to add a spline point, and it's exactly the same with this. But now just by adding that one extra, or subdividing that face into two, just gives us that modifying control point we can grab and play around with. So I'm not, and I spent, when I first modelled up that pinch spot, I spent ages. sort of, you know, try and get it just how I want it. I'm not going to do all that now because it's very boring you watching me modifying a pinch spot. The only thing I would say is the actual pinch itself, I might do by just, well, I actually pinched it, that area. Let's just pinch it, draw it in, and pinch it as if your thumbs were pressing into it. Something like that.
Awesome.
Everyone's a critic. Oh dear. But you can see just by pulling that in, it gives that idea of a pinch. So it's the kind of thing, as I say repeatedly, to have a go at, play around with. And what I would tend to do is perhaps, once I've got to a certain point, I'd have a look at it side on and have a look at these curves. And are these curves, you know, to my mind, are they sort of nice? Are they sort of, we need to sort of blend them out a bit? Are there any sort of really janky things going on here? Like this is a bit janky, I might want to sort of make this curve a little smoother. Things like that, and just have a look and see, is this flowing nicely in terms of these lines which describe the shape? You don't have to do it, but if you want to make a nice smooth flowing object, that might be something to look at doing. So for instance, I might want to just bring these up slightly, something like that. It's going to change the shape slightly, but it's okay. And you can just work your way around and have a look until you're happy with the shape. And you can, as I say, you can go on a very long time in this, getting it just how you want. And do remember, if you go a few steps down the line and you kind of got to the point where I liked it, sort of 4 or 5 modifiers back, you just Control Z to go back to an earlier stage in your modifier. That makes sense? So you're just pulling and pushing, prodding vertices, lines and points, get them however you want, basically. I want to do something like that. That's a bit nicer. Looking pretty good, quite happy with that. I might bring that out a bit more. So once you've got to a point where your outside, say your actually outside or inside surface of your jug is where you want, I might turn off the canvases at this point. They've kind of done their job. And you can see the object a bit better. Doesn't look great, but we'll go with that for now. It's a bit of a fat thing, isn't it? But what we can do at this stage, there's a couple of things we need to do. Obviously, this isn't going to work very well as a jug. Any idea why? It's not on the bottom, is it? It's going to be quite leaky. So we need to fill that bottom. Okay, so it's a bit different in the sculpted environment to the surface environment. This is a surface, we could just patch it, and we could take this out into the surface environment and patch it, but I'm not going to at this stage because we can fill holes within the sculpted environment. So if you go to the modify menu,
this would be a good point, like you were saying before, the circle. If you went into the other sketch mode, you would put a circle in the bottom, and then you could probably use the stitch or something like that.
you may be able to bring something into to merge an edge. I'd have to look at that, I have to say, where you could perhaps snap something to a circular shape. Don't know, I'd have to have a look. If you want to just fill a hole, we've got, unsurprisingly, fill hole. That's what it says. And a bit like the patch, you just click on one edge of the hole you want to fill. It'll understand, that's the hole. It does give different ways of filling the hole in terms of how these faces are subdivided, or this whole face, if you like, is subdivided. And you've got a little drop-down menu. You can have a reduced star, a fill star, which is, in this case, just a one surface, or a collapse. I might go for collapse in this case, but whatever one seems the most appropriate for what you're trying to do. We've also got, when you fill this hole, we've got this tick box, keep creases. If it's not ticked, when it fills that hole, it will try and blend it into a smooth object. But you have always got the option to put creases into something. I want creases in this, I want it to sit flat. So I'm going to click on keep creases, and I'll keep that crease line here for this particular one. Just while we're talking about creases, if you want to add any creases in, we can go to the crease tool. And we can click on any of our lines, and we can add a crease in. Oh, it's not liking that for some reason. So your object doesn't have to be a blobby object. You can put creases in as well at any given point. I just want a crease in on this bottom. So we've now got a jug which at least will hold water, but it's still a surface. So we need to give it a thickness. Now again, we can come out of this, we can finish the form, and it would end up as a surface body, if you remember. And how would we thicken it in that case? Exactly. Well, we would thicken in this case. The shell is the reverse of that. You've got a solid object. We can, however, thicken within the sculpt environment, and that's really useful. And I'll explain why if I do it in a minute. So we can go to modify menu. Down the bottom, we've got about three-quarters of it, and we've got thicken. Does exactly the same thing as the thicken tool within surface modeling. It's asking what surface do I want to thicken. Well, I'm going to click on everything. It's one surface. And it's giving this rather interesting preview. It's a millimeter wall thickness. Now I could change this, but I'm going to leave it at a millimeter because it's actually a really small thing. We've got different types of thicken type. So I'll show you the different types by looking at them. So I'm just going to click OK on that. And it's now given that jug its thickness, an even wall thickness of 1 millimeter. And the edges are softened, they're rounded over. So if I just go back and redo that, we could have sharp edges. And now we've got a sharp edge going around. So it depends what you want, obviously. Go back to soft edges. We could also have no edge and we just have two surfaces, which is creating an offset surface. I'll go back to soft. And the reason for doing the thicken within the sculpt environment now, if I want to now go and change that wall thickness and have some parts of my model thicker and some parts of it thinner, I can modify it. Whereas if I went into the surface environment, it would just stay at that even wall thickness. Because we're in a sculpt environment, and we thickened it now, we can modify it again. So I might want to modify, say, this bit here and make this bit come a bit closer together by just changing that thickness there so it comes a bit closer. I might want to thin this bit down, modify this bit to make a slightly better spout, so it pours a bit better. So whilst that thicken is just a point in time, it doesn't keep it always at that 1 millimeter thickness. We can now go and modify it and change it to what we want. That's why it's useful having the thicken tool in the sculpt environment. So there's really a finished pinch pot. We've made the surface using the cylinder, we've filled in the hole, we've thickened it, and then we've modified it to change the wall thickness where we want, basically. So it's very much, it's fluid. It's a fluid modeling environment. Once you're happy with this, we can click on Finish Form. If for any reason it doesn't, it gives you that warning. It'll be because there's an overlapping face. So let's make that happen. So if I've inadvertently overlapped that face, you can kind of see it's overlapped. If I try and finish that form, failed to convert. I mean, technically, you could squish a piece of clay together and that would be all right in reality, but for Fusion, it's not all right. So that's one thing that it can't deal with. So we're just going to have to return, go back to that, and in this case, I'll just Control Z. And now if I finish the form, it's finished. And it's come in as a one-off solid body. And that's pretty much it. But now I could also fillet it. So if I wanted to put just a slight radius on this edge, I could do so, just to smooth that bit off, but it's still got that nice flat bottom. And I could also put perhaps a fillet on the inside as well, maybe a slightly bigger one, just to smooth that internal surface off as well. So hopefully you can see how you can take reference geometries or reference canvases, use this as a starting point, play around to your heart's content within the sculpt environments. There's an awful lot you can do in there, and this is just really an introduction this evening into how to use it. I'll go really and play around with it.
Probably a couple of things you could try. Also, I think you can't you can use pictures of something like that as a reference.
Absolutely, yeah. If you look on Fusion, YouTube on Fusion, there's tons of YouTube clips on how people are using surface modeling, perhaps more so for car design. That segues beautifully into one of the examples I was going to show you and how I've used sculpting in certain times in actual stuff that I've made rather than just doing, interesting exercises. Before I go on to that, are there any sorts of questions or any bits you want me to go over again, or does it all make perfect sense?
Oh, that's kind of unrelated to this. Shortcuts. Can you do custom shortcuts for programming different things? So if you're in
macros?
Yeah, so in this sculpt, it's Alt, W, E, and R to change between transforms, transform, scale, and rotate.
Right.
So you could remap that to just W, E, and R.
There are macros you can put into Fusion. I've never done it,
Right.
But there are ways of doing that, certainly.
Okay.
You can also, if you're using one of these space mice, you can program those to do exactly that kind of thing. You can write your own macros for space mice, which is another really nice thing. You just press a button and it will do straight in. So I have done that in the past when I've been working commercially, but not anymore. Any other questions about sculpting and what bits you want me to go over again? Okay. I'll show you some examples of how I've used it, which might be hopefully useful in understanding how you might want to actually apply sculpting. Let's just have a quick look at, okay, here's the first one. So this was done a few years ago with a jewellery student on the Erasmus program, I think from Germany. She wanted to create a chrysalis with a crystal in it as a piece of jewellery. Now she had got photographs of the chrysalis from the side, from the top, I think, and from the front. So she's got those reference canvases, so we could bring them in. And I don't know if I've got them actually in this particular one, but we could use those as reference canvases to start drawing that shape in the same way that we did with the pinch pot. If you look at the timeline, it's quite complicated. This is because myself and her at the time were very much learning Fusion and sculpt environment, so this is probably not a good modelling example. But we got to where we wanted in the end after learning how to use the sculpt environment for this particular object. But I guess it's kind of obvious perhaps why we use the sculpt environment for this object. It's quite a complex shape, which we could have had a go at lofting, but it's very biomorphic, it's very organic, and this is just a representation. It wasn't massively, really accurate, but we had this kind of interesting sort of ridge with the, sort of dips in them or notches in them, which were in this chrysalis. Had these little bumps in it, but we could also pop in quite nicely using a torus primitive some little loops for holding the chain, because this was a pendant, so we could use that as well. So we can see if we go, let me do that. Let's see if the body will show me the body. I don't know why it's graying out like that. I think it's just that it's showing me there. That's just one of them, isn't it? Right, so I'm not going to go back and try and look what I did with this one, but it's just an example of how we use the sculpt environment. But then we took it into the solid modeling to do the internal features. So we split it. If I just turn one of them off, we split it and hollowed it out and shelled it, and then drew these more sort of geometric features within just normal Fusion workspace, using just straightforward extrusion tools. So this is just a sketch with a hexagon extruded to hold this hexagonal prism crystal. That makes sense? And if you look at the other side, we've got the other side. So when these two halves came together and you pop the crystal in place, it would lock together. When you took the crystal out, it would come apart. That was the idea. We 3D printed it for her. It was at the time when we had the castable resin on our Formlab printers, but the resin wasn't good enough to cast out. It was in the early stages of that material being developed. So we did just a 3D print, but then these days we could definitely make it using the castable wax, which is much better for making jewellery. So yeah, absolutely make it. Yeah, definitely. So for jewellery, you know, it's quite a good option. Well, there's lots of different programs for working in jewellery, but quite more of a craft style object, if you like. There's one other one I want to show you, which I think is worth looking at. And I'm just going to close some of these down because it's on my different team space. Just bear with me while I shuffle me. Remember I showed you the Lego car last week? I'll show you that one in a minute, if that's another useful one. There was that Lego car, which I found quite awkward to model. And so I used it for it, and I'm just going to, show you that. It's on a different team. And it would be good for you to try and work out which was the bit I struggled with. And which one is it? Well, exactly. But I did. Just open it up.
Get the blowtorch out, start melting brick.
Slow to open. Okay, so nearly all of it was, as you remember, I did this in the surface modelling environment. But there was one area which I found quite awkward to model and get to blend in. And I've done it particularly well. But can you have any idea which bits I used the sculpt tool for rather than the surface modelling? Exhaust pipe was actually really easy. Yeah, no, it didn't have a fancy exhaust, no. Wheel arches, yes, absolutely. I did actually do the roof as a sculpt as well on this one, but the wheel arches were the ones that were really tricky. I tried doing a loft, but I kind of designed the rest of the body, and I was trying to get the wheel arches to match or to fit. And I found actually that was really quite awkward to do just lofting, and sculpting gave me a really quick way of getting a shape which was I could kind of blend in to the rest of the body, because the rest of the body was kind of fixed at this point, but I had to match those wheel arches. And the reason it's so flared out is just the nature of the wheelbase I was working with, or I was trying to make it look like. I don't know, it's probably easiest not to show you on this model, but if to make a wheel arch, how might we do that in a sculpt environment? What primitive might we use? Cylinder, yeah, absolutely. It's based around a cylindrical object, a wheel, obviously. So let's just make a thing like that. Let's just let's make that 3. So here we've got a cylinder. But one nice thing we can do in Fusion is just delete faces just by selecting and deleting them. And hey presto, we've already got something that looks a bit wheel arch-like. And now if I modify this by just very quickly, I realized that I could, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but you can get to that shape quite quickly. You can start getting it however you want it to be, or something like that. But I found that, oh, that's a really quick and simple way of getting that shape, and then I could then sort of offer it up to the side of that surface of the car that was there. I can try and go back into that model, but you
They got a door.
Just have a box.
yeah.
And then match it up to that.
Okay. Let's, do something more than a box. Let's do something sort of slightly more sort of curvy as this was. I didn't match it up perfectly by any means, but I got it to a point where I was reasonably happy. So then you can literally just, oops, modify tool on. And literally you can just sort of start to blend it in. And this is, you know, with sculpt environment, it's not, you can't like snap to one thing to another, but you can get it to the point and then curve it out should you wish. So if this was, you know, you want to put more of a curve in and blend it out, you can do so and then bring it back in again. So it took a bit of sort of toing and froing to get it sort of just sort of sit kind of how I wanted it. I wanted it to overlap, you know, so I overlap, I could trim it away because once I've turned it from a sculpt form into a surface, I can just trim it away with one surface to another, and then you can fillet it. So that was the approach, quite simple and quite quick to do something quite complex like a wheel arch. If you actually look at wheel arches, they aren't actually very round, they're just round where they go round the wheel and they give all sorts of shapes.
Can you do those?
To do what, sorry?
What you just said.
Oh, fillet it, and yeah, well, let's have a look. So let's just make sure these do overlap. That's not quite overlapping. Let's bring that in so it's properly overlapping, so it's sticking through the other side. And what I might do actually, we don't really need, so you can see it better. Get rid of those and get rid of those. Like this, so put it back. Just so you can see it from this side. So if I finish this form, we've got two surfaces, okay, and they're overlapping, so we can use one surface to trim away another surface. So in the surface environment, we've got the trim tool, pair of scissors, cutting a surface. It's also down here somewhere, here we go, trim. And the trim tool, we've got to think about what's cutting what. So the tool, I'm trying to get rid of this little thin section that's sticking out into that surface, so I'm going to use this area as the trim tool itself, and then it's selected that as the trim tool, but it doesn't know whether I want to trim away this bit or this bit, so I need to click on the bit I want to remove. It should turn red, and it will trim it away. And obviously we'd have a hole in the middle of that, which I won't model now, but then you could trim away and get that full surface, stitch them together, and fillet it. But then you've got two surfaces which do absolutely match. So,
if you've already created the body of the vehicle, are you able to then create a surface from that? We can create a surface from that. Can you then take that back into, back into the sculpt mode, as you did with that?
you could, but what would you want to do?
Well, because you've already created the side of the vehicle.
Yeah.
And you're now trying to put the wheel arch onto that vehicle.
Yeah.
And so you want it to, where you're using that to trim the wheel arch for this, you're wanting to be able to sculpt that wheel arch onto something like this.
Yeah, but you don't even have to. You could create an offset surface, if you like, in the sculpt environment. Absolutely, but you don't really need to, because you can still see any surface you've created within surface modeling or solid modeling in the sculpt environment. So if you've already created something, when you go into the sculpt environment and you make a sculpt form, it'll grey out. It will sort of make it transparent, but you can still use it as reference. So you could do that, but you don't really need to. But absolutely, yeah, you can.
If your wheel trim went all the way down, so the interior of the wheel trim was its own element, essentially, would you use the trim tool again? So you trim the curve to the body.
Exactly. That's what's known as overbuilding in surface modeling, where you create basically surfaces which overlap each other, and you're trimming one way, you're trimming the other way, and basically you'll keep on trimming until you get the one surface that you do want.
That's what you did on that sled model. The one that you showed last week, you built a custom thing based on the real.
Oh, on the Quadrack thing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That overbuilding technique where you make one surface bigger than you need to, other one cut into it, and you can trim them away to get that join.
Pinch job where you overlap, you've got an error, and you use the same technique to cut away the bits you don't want if you wanted that.
No, because it won't come out of the sculpting or the form environment. It will say there's an error and it won't turn it into a surface. Otherwise, you should be able to. If it would actually do that, because it's a self-intersecting surface, the maths engine obviously can't cope with that. So, yeah, but if it could, then you could. Yeah, so yeah, I brought those surfaces together, exactly what I did there, and then you can just see I've kind of crudely filleted it just to blend it in a bit more smoothly, but it looks a bit better when the geometry lines are turned off. So a relatively crude use of sculpting, but it did the job for me on that one.
Really good result.
It came out well. I mean, it came out well in terms of it still looks a bit like a slightly ugly monkey, but
On the front it points down.
I know, but it kind of had to do certain things to fit around the chassis and to look not wrong from other directions. So I was trying to make a car body that didn't really fit over the chassis. That was the problem I had really with that one. But the client was very happy with it, so that's all that mattered. So there's one other thing I want to show you, kind of as a final thing for modelling, because we'll be looking at technical drawing next week and how to take 3D objects and turn them into engineering drawings for manufacturing. I'm just going to go back into the other team for this one. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A this time as well.
First time in 5 minutes.
So the last thing I want to show you is, there's nothing that one. Okay, I'll give points to anyone that can tell me what this actually is. No, go on.
Is it for dentists? It goes over
You're very close. You're very close, all of you. It's kind of like an oxygen mask.
I thought it was like a Mobius tube, but it's not quite finished. It moves back into itself. You know, the vase.
Yeah. It's nothing as esoteric as that, that's for sure. You're all on the right. Yeah, you're on the right track. This is actually very COVID related. This is a ventilator tube. It's a laryngeal mask airway, and this is if you got COVID in the early days and you were put on a ventilator, this would go down inside your airways through your mouth and be inflated to open up your airways so you could breathe better. The reason I'm showing you this is I modeled this up for a client who's medical devices, and it's a workshops for some young anaesthetists, and we wanted something they were very familiar with. So this is a very standard piece of medical equipment for anaesthetists. That's why we did it. But the reason I'm showing it to you is when I modeled this up, this was a wonderful example of using all the different workspaces in one object, in one modeling form. So if you look at the timeline, right at the very beginning, we've got a sculpt icon. Any idea which bit of this was sculpted? The torus, this bit here.
inside of it.
So this kind of shape here, this cool shape, I use a sculpting program. Not this bit, not that bit. No, I just did that bit as the sculpt. The reason being was that I thought, what's the simplest way of creating that shape? Torus, slightly stretched. And literally took like 2 seconds to model that. And I thought, oh, that's quite nice, isn't it? But then the rest of it, so this is, any idea of what kind of modeling function this is? This particular shape? A loft. Absolutely, going from this shape to this shape, it's sort of blending. That's a loft. Any idea what this one is? A sweep. Absolutely. And that's pretty much it. The rest of it is just, well, what's this piece here? A revolve. Absolutely. What's this one along here? Sweep again. And finally, Well, this one's a bit more, can't see it, it's kind of transparent, but that's a different extrude and another revolve or something like that. But the point of showing you this is a really nice example in quite a short timeline of all the different things that we've looked at throughout the entire course, really, if you think about it. It's got the standard solid body modelling in terms of sweeps and extrudes and revolves and lofts. It's got a bit of surface modelling. This was actually done as a surface loft and then thickened. Why do you think I did this as a surface loft and this is a surface sweep? That's right, but I could have done that as a solid body, couldn't I? I did it as a surface for a particular reason. Same wall thickness, absolutely. So instead of having to model the whole thing as a solid, perhaps then shelling it, which I could have done, perhaps made more sense for me to do it as a surface and give it a thickness. So that was a bit of surface lofting, surface sweeping. Just a standard solid revolve. And this was a standard, I think, probably solid sweep, might have shelled it out to make it into a tube, or might have even used a pipe function, if you remember the pipe function. So this basically inflates this bit. So when it's put into your, it's deflated, and then this bit has got, yeah. So this is attached to, that doesn't come, this is attached to the pump, that inflates. So this sticks out, this is the bit that sticks out, and this is the bit which is attached to the ventilator. So that's a separate bit of that inflator. Yeah, I'll send, what I was going to do, well, that's what I'll do is, if you're interested, I'll send you that in next week's, list of resources. And have a look. It's a kind of a nice culmination of all the different things we've looked at in one design, basically. And it's an actual thing, which, was shut down the throats of millions of people, unfortunately, over the last few years. Yes, very standard. You put the bed. No, we did actually work with the company on the ventilator challenge. Remember the government ventilator challenge? We're still working with them actually. They've got the last five. Not that I had much to do with it, but they've created this whole new ventilator system out of that. But this was done because, as I say, we were doing workshops with young anaesthetists. We were trying to model up some really recognisable objects, show them how they could create their own sort of innovations within the medical devices world if they wanted to. Show them how easy it was to use Fusion and things like that. So that's the point of doing it. I'll send that to you as like the culmination of our modelling exercises we've done over the last few weeks. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. In terms of, we're going to be looking at engineering drawings next week. That's kind of a slightly separate bit compared to all the modelling, because that's taking models and turning them into 2D drawings. But just thinking back, is there any questions or any bits of Fusion anyone wants me to look at and try and briefly talk about, or anything you want, basically? Everything. Go through the whole thing again in 15 minutes. I'll have to talk very fast. Engraving. Engraving text or any other syncing text in. Yeah, there's something I was going to show you and we kind of ran out of time. That spoon example. Let's find that spoon example because that's on that. Surface modelling spoon example. I've run out of time, I think, on showing you text on this, where it has got some engraved text on the underside. Text is a bit crappy in Fusion, I'll be the first to admit. Cheers, take care. Nice to see you. But there are quite limited text tools within there.
You can import something from Illustrator.
Yes.
That's why I made those 3D icons.
You can import a DXF from it.
It's free to draw out what it is.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look at exactly that. Extrude cut. But interestingly, well, let's have a look. So let's say we want to put in some text onto a surface. Okay, this is a compound curved surface. It's not very curved, but it's not a flat surface. So we need to write the text, and we need to write the text hovering somewhere above the surface we want to project it into. So we're going to need a construction plane. Here's one I happened to make earlier, but we know how to make an offset plane, don't we? We just choose a plane and offset it appropriately. I'm going to turn that round so it's horizontal. So before we write the text, it's often worthwhile just drawing a line along which that text is going to run. You don't have to, but it makes it life easier. So I'm going to just grab a line from the line tool and just draw a line somewhere along here. Now this line doesn't have to be a straight line. Fusion will do text along a curvy line as well. But for this instance, let's just use a straight line. So once I've drawn my path for the text to sit on, I'm going to go to Create Menu and Text. And we get a dialog box up over here, and we have just normal text or text on a path. So I'm going to select text on a path. And then it asks me what the path is, unsurprisingly. So I'm going to click on the path. And here we go. It comes up with sample text. It's upside down and back to front because it's a stupid computer and it doesn't know anything but know any better. So, but let's put in whatever text we want. So I'm going to put in spoon. Oops. If we want to turn it round, we've got those little flip tools at the bottom here. So, oops, we just need to flip it around. Oh, the placement. It's, you just got to flip it around using those tools to get it around the right way. The alignment, just like anything else, you can either line left, center it on your line, or align right. You can make it bold. You can select all of the fonts on your computer.
Certainly my experience with Boss or in Engrave, some of the fonts don't work.
Yes, not all of the fonts will work. Some of the really fine sort of scripty ones, or the ones where they're trying to imitate sort of handwriting done in an oil pastel or something like that, don't work. But just your standard, more normal fonts will work.
And also, even some of the normal looking fonts, they come from a strange source. So they're not the standard Microsoft.
I think you might need a TrueType font off the top of my head. There is a way around it. Let's just choose a font, any old font.
Is that where using an SVG would be better?
Possibly. I mean, the good thing about using, obviously, with Fusion and native text, it's all editable. Yeah. If you bring in an SVG and you want to change it, and you made a spelling mistake, you've got to bring it back in again. So, but yeah, I mean, I'll just choose any old font and see if it works, basically. We can also obviously change things like height just by typing in a value, or whatever you want, make it larger or smaller. So once you've got the text that you want, and you're happy with it, we can click OK. We can click OK, and we can see it's hovering above there. If we want to edit that, we want to go back into that text box, we can just double click on the text, and it should bring that text box back in, and we can edit it. Now, if we want to now extrude cut that, into that surface, we need to finish the sketch, and back. There we go. Sorry about that for making you seasick. We're going to use the extrude tool, but we're going to extrude cut with it. Okay. So we go to extrude, and we hover over the text. It'll pick up the whole text we've typed in. We don't have to click on every letter. And what we need to do, instead of just giving it a value of, saying, if we just extrude down like this an amount, at some point when it hits that that surface, or that body rather, it's going to realize you want to cut into it, but it's not cutting in an equal depth. So we want to make it cut in at an equal depth, so it's an even sort of 0.5 million or whatever we want it to be. So instead of extent type being a distance, we're going to change it to object. So now that preview's disappeared, and it's asking us what is the object we want to select. If I click on this surface here, like so, oops. Sorry, try that again. It'll do something like this. It's now extruding, a solid extrusion, to meet that surface. Again, that's not what we want. So we need to give it an offset, a minus figure. let's go into that surface. So let's give it a minus of 0.5. Out it, it'll update. And now you can see it's cutting into that surface, keeping that surface 0.5 mil. That was the missing bit, was it? The only thing is, the only problem with that is, if you sometimes in Fusion you'll get these geometry lines just cutting across faces. They're not really doing anything. You can only, when you're selecting a face to extrude cut into, you can only select one face. That's it. So that's the only thing you've got to think about when you're doing something like this. There is one other thing which is useful to understand when you're working with text as well. If I go back to the text sketch itself, there may be times when you want to explode the text. You want it not to be a sort of standard font, and you just want to turn it into line work. That can be really useful on occasion. You wouldn't know where to look for that, but if you hover over the text and right-click, you've got the option to explode the text. You can't then go back and change the font. It just becomes geometry then, but sometimes it's really useful to know. And if you explode the text, it turns into a series of green geometry lines. These are fixed. It's fixed to that font. Now you can't edit it, but you might need to explode it for all sorts of reasons. It might be a way of working around fonts that don't work if you explode the text.
I think that's how I did my first text. I made a leader box scheme.
Yeah.
That's how I did that, because that just wasn't working.
Yeah.
I had to do about 4 letters at a time because it just couldn't go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you've got a really tricky font with lots of line work, it will struggle. Yeah, that's true.
So to make my step, make a simple fix, and then I could make something with Illustrator and just import that and use the same technique.
Absolutely. You can bring in an Illustrator. I don't think you can bring in an Illustrator file directly. You probably can upload it to the data panel. Just find out where you can. Just looks like a sketch. Just looks like a.
Normally, you have to export it as an SVG from.
Yeah, or it'll bring in. If you look at what it'll bring in an SVG or a DXF.
There's a fantastic video on YouTube for making stamp in Fusion.
Yeah, is that the one where it's got?
Yeah,
you
it's
can change.
together and stuff.
I saw that. That is useful. But
Just don't want it.
simpler.
Not all SVGs are equal.
No, not all DXFs are equal.
No, exactly.
Yes, and what I tend to do in Illustrator, when coming out with Illustrator saving as DXF, I'll often save it as an early type of DXF, because I don't understand why or how the drawing exchange format works, but sometimes there's certain things it doesn't import correctly. But if you bring it back to an early DXF, like a R12 or whatever it is, or R13, then it generally does work. I have found SVGs to be quite reliable coming into an Illustrator. I mean, into Fusion rather. They can work quite well.
What's the difference between a gap and a solid area?
So if you think about, if bringing in that sketch, it'll understand whether it's a closed loop or not. So if it's a closed loop and you brought it in, it'll see that as a closed loop. If it's not a closed loop and there's a gap in your original Illustrator file, it won't show that pale blue, if you remember those closed loops. So if it's correctly drawn, you should be able to pick the bits you want to extrude. But you've got to do it accurately in Illustrator. So yeah. And there is a really nice function if you ever get into CNC machining with text in Fusion, or using a V cutter to get really nice crisp text, which is a longer thing to show you, but there is a really nice technique within Fusion for creating really finely machined text using a V cutter from this kind of setup with text in the first place. Doing an extrude cut, and then the V cutter will create that nicely, V'd out, engraved text.
So it's being engraved like with a chisel.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then it does it all for you, and it's wonderful.
And where was that?
I might have an example. I don't know if I do have an example. It's just where I've put that example.
That's very cool. That's a very cool thing.
It is very cool, and I might have to spend some time finding it, but I have got one for it, and I can always. What's your name again? Sorry,
Michael.
Michael. I can always email it on to you or share it with you, because don't know if I've got it. Yeah, cheers. I'll find it for you and send it to you. It's all in the machining. It's a very specific toolpath within the machining section. It's, I think it's, yeah, 2D sham. No, it's engraved, surprisingly.
What you call that, basically, that's just then a model. So if you wanted to say 3D printing, you could forward that. You just normal model.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is specifically for CNC machining that will give you this engraved chiseled effect. It wouldn't work for 3D printing.
It wouldn't.
No, you'd have to model it, unfortunately.
That's a shame. That's a shame.
It is a shame. Yeah, yeah.
Because that would be really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a way that I've come across of doing that 3D printing.
So that isn't 3D then? So the result from that engraved feature.
It's 3D, because you're doing it. I'd love to be able to find this.
So could you not engrave it here and then go back to the other panel and keep the...
No, because what the machining does, it creates a toolpath, but it doesn't actually turn that into a 3D model.
Ah, okay, fine. Yeah. So my question was going to follow the 3D printing about
Yeah.
the slicing tools in here.
Yeah.
Can we have a quick look at that maybe? Or-
I've never used the slicing tool within Fusion,
yeah,
so
that's right.
I would be blind leading the blinds. I should do it at some point. We've got so into using Cura because it's brilliant,
I was going to say I use Cura.
and it's got so much stuff in there. And Fusion's getting better all the time, I'm sure, but I haven't really looked at it yet. So, but it is in there, but I've never used it. So you can be better off looking at it yourself.
Is there any why when I'm 3D printing I score as STL, which is not always reliable. I can see there's an advantage by doing it, by keeping it in this environment in a way. But I quite like the flexibility that having separate files gives me. Would the manufacturer, would they say keep it all in Fusion, slice it, all that kind of stuff, or is it that good?
In terms of the slicing software in Fusion, I don't know. I don't know that it's only been in for about a year. And obviously they bought some kind of slicing software and shoved it in. I don't know if it's, I mean, if you look at Cura and how something like that has, over the last 10 years, really refined all its settings, I doubt it's at that point, in all honesty. But I can't say that for sure. And they are constantly evolving it. But yeah, I can't say how good it is.
Yeah, mine's also on services for 3D printing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think with 3D printing, we're working towards 3MF as the default now, which is much better than STL. So that you can export as a 3MF out of Fusion rather than STL, which has a lot more data coming with it, which probably gets around some of those issues of STL.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you.
Pleasure.
The only thing with the, where we have the text going in like that, it's projecting it straight, isn't it? It's not wrapping it.
It is. Yeah, so that's following the surface of that.
But what I'm saying, I did.
Oh, I see. It's not wrapping around.
Not
No.
wrapping it, doing it in like that.
No,
Doing
that's
it
true.
in, so that as you're going around the bottle,
Yeah.
it's all going in.
Yes. There is a workaround for that.
Yeah.
That's almost like an hour's long in itself,
Yeah,
and it's pretty horrible, I have to say.
It's
It's a sheet metal one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do have an example of that, but
If you don't draw a line and then project that right onto the bottom or the curved surface, and then just use that curved project line to do what you did there? No, just no.
just no. It's one of the things you often get asked in Fusion. Can we project around the curve like that?
Yeah.
Not perpendicular to that curve, and it's just like, well, yes, but you've got to do it with sheet metal. You've got to basically under it.
When I knew nothing about Fusion, just by following online tutorials.
Yeah.
And I'm intending to try it again now that I actually understand how Fusion works.
It's a pretty horrible workaround. Other programs, that's one thing other programs do better. One of its issues. I guess when they were designing Fusion, they weren't thinking about people wanting to wrap text around the cylinder, but that's one of the things. No, it's not really anything to do with the text or any other. It doesn't have to be text. Any design sort of wrapped around. It used to have a wrap around cylinder function, which was taken away, and I think it was because it was horribly glitchy. So it's in the sheet metal environment now, and you basically got to create that curve shape you want, flatten it out, put whatever text or design on, and recurve.